Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week I predicted that number 1 would be How to Train Your Dragon, number 2 would be Lilo and Stitch, number 3 would be Ballerina, number 4 would be Materialists, and number 5 would be Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. And I wasn't really close. If you got your predictions right for this weekend, here's your shout out right now. Congratulations. I mean the movies were correct. All 5 of the movies are correct here. It's just after, the Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders remakes at the top, it all just kind of shuffled around in some ways. So let's just dive right on into it. Number 1 was obviously the How to Train Your Dragon remake. Duh. I don't think anyone was expecting this to flop so bad. It doesn't even make it to the top. Obviously that was going to happen. And obviously because, this is... it's been a couple years since the last How to Train Your Dragon movie, but also this is specifically like mining in your nostalgia for the very first film that came out from 2010, capturing that magic again. It's all about that and going back to the start of something. So of course, that means it's going to have the largest opening domestically, worldwide, whatever, for the entire franchise. It opened to 83 million domestically. So for the How to Train Your Dragon films, that is 40 million over the original film's opening, 34 million over 2, and 28 million over The Hidden World. So, with each film, they've, their opening weekends have gotten a little higher and higher. Worldwide, it opened to 197 million. Apparently, this budget is 150 million, which is actually pretty good, all things considered. Like, it looks pretty good. Like, I've seen the movie, like, it looks pretty good. There's not really those moments where I'm like, oh my god, that looks awful. What kind of green screen monstrosity is it? Like, it looks pretty solid visually all around. So 150, and that's like both CGI and practical effects. So 150 million is actually pretty cool. I wish it wasn't necessarily tied to like the remake IP of it all, but as far as like, a bigger blockbuster kind of budget, like this is pretty reasonable and fine. The ones to beat right now domestically, it needs 77 million until it outgrosses The Hidden World, and then worldwide it needs 298 million until it outgrosses the original film. I think it's interesting how the opening weekends got higher domestically for each one, but the domestic runs overall are in reverse order. So the original film is still the highest grossing one, even if it didn't open to the highest numbers. I just think that's a little interesting. So yeah, no, there's no surprises here. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing really to be shocked about. I think no one's really, and this isn't one of those things either where people are looking at it like, oh my gosh, what great money it's bringing in. Like it brought in some, some good money. 83 million is pretty good. But it's not like one of those where it's like, it's breaking record. It's just kind of whatever, you know what I mean? Like it's pretty high, but one of those like in between pretty high ones. So I just don't think this is like a very interesting win, which is why I'm going to move on rather quickly to number 2, which is just Lilo and Stitch. Like I said, the Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders remakes taking over the top of the box office. Congrats guys, taking their old works, things that that they've made a name for themselves in the business with, and just mining that for IP. At the very least, How to Train Your Dragon kept Dean DeBlois in the director's chair and didn't stray too far from that vision, unlike this one right here. Lilo and Stitch made 15 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of 366. For Disney remakes, it has outgrossed The Jungle Book now just by 2 million domestically. It needs 138 million until Beauty and the Beast. And then worldwide, it is sitting at 825 million, which places it 126 million away from The Jungle Book. So, there you go. Jungle Book's the one to beat worldwide, but it already has domestically, even if Jungle Book is a better film. But, I feel like I've beat that drum long enough, and it's weird to say also, like, The Jungle Book, man, they haven't really made a remake that's been, like, as good or, like, transformative as that one, because Jon Favreau made it, and then Jon Favreau went on to, make The Lion King, which, is just kind of set the stage, or maybe not necessarily set the stage, but they kind of just continued with the bad trends of these remakes and how they make changes for the worse, or just make things longer and not as good or magical or special or visually interesting or performance-wise interesting. We don't need to dwell on this too much longer. Let's move on to number 3, which is The Materialists. Heyo, this is actually A24's third highest opening ever as far as like a wide release. We've talked about this before, a movie like Everything Everywhere, went on to gross so much money because of great reception and, Oscar run and all that. But as far as its opening weekend, it was in limited release. So, it didn't really, it's not up there as far as like one of the best openings. But Materialists opened wide and they opened to 12 million. So that is the third best opening ever, squeaking right by Heretic, which was just a couple months ago, actually, in the grand scheme of things, just by 2 million. It's 1 million below Hereditary's opening weekend and 13 million below Civil War. Obviously, that's that's their true king for a bit, but Materialists squeaking in here is actually pretty interesting. Worldwide, it only bumps up to like 15 million, but this is on an initial production budget of 20 million. So if they can maybe, keep some audiences coming in, keep being interested in this for a little bit, they could potentially double this budget and be in a pretty good spot. I will say though that the Rotten Tomatoes scores are, both in the positive fresh, and the cinema score is technically good. Like it's a B minus, which isn't like amazing, but it's fine. But I do think, looking into that just a little bit more and how certain people are responding to this movie, I do wonder if the drop off could be big. I'm hoping not. It's a solid movie. And, supports Celine Song doing more films in the future. Past Lives is amazing. But I do wonder, because they marketed it so much as like this, rom-com, and a lot of people keep calling it a rom-com. Even after they've seen it in their reviews, they keep calling it a rom-com. You're transforming the rom-com genre, and it's like, it has a couple funny lines, but that doesn't make it a rom-com. You know what I mean? Like this is a romantic drama, And I do wonder if, people seeing it, and I wonder if the B minus kind of relates to that. They're like, well, it's not as funny or as, joyful, because not to spoil anything about the movie, because it's not like this devastating work, but it does have some points where emotionally you might be like, ooh, you know what I mean? And I can't spoil it, but you kind of just have to watch it. So I do wonder if that word of mouth could potentially spread, and maybe that could affect its staying power. But for right now, it is A24's third best wide release, and I'm sure they're celebrating over at the A24 offices, and hopefully they're all good. Before we move on to number 4, I did want to quickly just mention Past Lives, as far as like it's Celine Song's previous film, and it's also tied to A24. It did outgross that film domestically by 2 million. Worldwide, it needs 27 million to get there. So as far as like our, talking about staying power, hopefully, they have enough to potentially outgross that one. But even if not, I think they're still in a pretty solid, condition here where it could be okay in the end. I don't think outgrossing Past Lives necessarily will, be the key victory here. I think the third highest opening thing is more important at that point. Number 4 is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, making 10.3 million, adding to a domestic total of 166 million. That places it now 6 million away from outgrossing Dead Reckoning's domestic run, almost there. And then worldwide, we are at the $500 million point, getting to 506 million worldwide. It has outgrossed the original film by 49 million, and it needs 43 million until it gets to MI2. I think, we've talked about Mission Impossible and, the asterisks that are kind of behind the budget, how much it's making in theaters, whatever. I do think it is very, very, very interesting, though, how, and I think it's a glowing endorsement of this film and this film's staying power, that last weekend, Ballerina was the action movie to see. And Mission Impossible was kind of taking a bit of a backseat. But right now, Mission Impossible had a better hold and lasted in a spot higher above our number 5, which is Ballerina, dropping from number 2 to number 5, opening to a little over 20 million. It just does not seem to have that, good, strong word of mouth or staying power domestically. It only made 9.4 million, not even like a 50% where it's like you open to a little over 20, so you get like 10 million. It's like, no, 9.4. You're dipping into the single digits, really, as far as the million you could make. That does add to a domestic total of 41 million, though. For the John Wick films, it is 2 million away from outgrossing the original film. For Len Wiseman's domestic box office, it is 10 million away from Underworld, still not being able to outgross those. I'm sure they might be kicking themselves a little bit over that. And then worldwide, it is bumped up to 91 million. So still not that much of a difference as far as like, when we talked about it last weekend, the domestic total was a little over 20 and worldwide it was only at 50. Now the domestic intake is 40 and the worldwide is not. That's still like, the difference is like 30 million from last week, and now it's a 50 million difference from those two numbers, which is better, but still not close to doubling their 80 to 90 million initial production budgets. And, you know, who knows how true the reshoot stuff is, if they needed maybe a bit more to, you know, to break even, whatever. But obviously those are things that you can speculate on, you know, talk endlessly about. I certainly think it's not necessarily great that it hasn't like held over well or caught on in that way, you know what I mean? Like Mission Impossible, a movie that's I guess a couple weekends old at this point, is still like, this is the one people want to see. This is the action movie you cannot top. And I think both films have great action. You know, I don't think it's a question of like, Ballerina is like every other modern action movie that sucks ass and Tom Cruise is it. Ballerina has great stunt team, you know, great action directing going on in that. I think it literally is kind of what I was talking about in my review and also last weekend. Like the reception is, it has these, you know, great action sequences, but people aren't really talking about it the same way they did that first John Wick, or even, you know, I know the sequel's kind of, you know, I think mostly positive, but some people were kind of like, oh, I don't know, kind of, you know, treading water here. The fourth one, though, people were like, oh, hell yeah, you know what I mean? And this one is just kind of like, back to basics of the first one, but it has a bit more of the heightened world that we've been exposed to, but they're not really, you know, they're not really pushing it that much forward. I think genuinely overall, that might be what's, you know, pushing some people away from, you know, wanting to give this a fair shake, wanting to go to the theater to see this, especially when a movie like Mission Impossible, which may not be getting as glowing reviews as Fallout did, people are still like, man, you still have to see some sequences in that film on the biggest screen possible. So yeah, man, Tom Cruise undefeated. Worldwide for the John Wick films, it has outgrossed the original film worldwide, though, by 5 million and needs 80 million now until Chapter 2. And then for Len Wiseman, you guessed it, it is still behind Underworld, at least by 4 million. So it's going to outgross that one at some point. It's just, yeah, not this triumphant victory that I'm sure Lionsgate was hoping for, especially with expanding the Wick universe, right? I know they're planning that like Kane spin-off. I do wonder if behind the scenes they're like, is that still a good idea? I'm sure some executive is like, see, this is why we need John Wick 5 more than any other film to ever exist. Because they only want to see John Wick. They only want to see Keanu Reeves in the lead, even though we killed his ass, and that was like a pretty good end to that character in the story. But now we can just bring him back for money. Number 6 is Karate Kid Legends, making 5.0 million, adding to a domestic total of 44 million. So for domestic runs for the Karate Kid, it has outgrossed Part 3 by 6 million. It is 46 million away from the original film now. And then worldwide, it is sitting at 89 million. So it's 1 million shy of doubling its 45 million initial production budget. Okay. I don't think this is a great victory that they're kind of just barely squeaking by 100 mil worldwide. You know, that's for movies like The Amateur these days, you know what I mean? Karate Kid, come on, that's a name. Anyways, for worldwide runs, it's 1 million away from the original film. So we might as well just say it's already outgrossed that. The next one to beat is Part 2, and they need 26 million to get there. I don't think it has the momentum to though. You know, bummer to say, I guess, but still, it's like, what can you say, you know? Number 7 is Final Destination Bloodlines, making 3.9 million, adding to a domestic total of 130 million. For horror films domestically, it has outgrossed The Ring 2002 by 1 million, and it's squeaking by Silence of the Lambs by a couple 100,000. I've talked about how thenumbers.com is a little weird with some of their lists, right? And sometimes I'm like, you know, take this with a grain of salt. I might be missing something because sometimes it's impossible to keep track of everything. You know what I mean? But it's like, and especially with a comment recently I got where someone was like, The Sixth Sense is in a horror film, and The Sixth Sense is not in thenumbers.com's horror movie list, but I keep inserting it. Someone said it's not a horror film, and, you know, I'm sure some people might have that opinion that it's not like your regular horror film, but come on. You can call that a horror film, and that's fine. It's still a great movie. It's not a worse film just because you can call it scary. But then you have something like Silence of the Lambs, which I feel like is a prime example of a movie that thenumbers.com would not include. I would say that's more like psychological, you know, thriller, as opposed to like a horror film, the way that, you know, they've listed some here, like The Ring, or, you know, the Conjuring stuff and It and all that, you know. I don't understand thenumbers.com. Man, I miss Box Office Mojo in its prime, when it wasn't like fucking bought up by IMDb and bullshit like that. God damn it. Anyways, it needs 7 million until it outgrosses the FNAF movie domestically and The Conjuring, so right now it is number 18 on that list. Worldwide, it is sitting at 271 million, so it's outgrossed A Quiet Place Day 1 by 10 million, and it's 2 million over The Nun 2, 4 million away from Silence of the Lambs, so it is number 20 for the horror films worldwide list. Silence of the Lambs is the one to beat worldwide, but domestically, no biggie, but it is in both lists here in the top 20 highest grossing horror movies ever, which is pretty cool. Number 8 is The Phoenician Scheme, making 3.05 million, adding to a domestic total of 12.7. This now adds to a worldwide total of 26 million, so they're about 4 million shy of outgrossing the initial production budget of 30 million. How much more they would need to break even, I do not know. Could it be double? Could it be a little less? Who knows? For Wes Anderson, though, domestically it did outgross Darjeeling Unlimited by 1 million. Needs 4 million now until The French Dispatch. Worldwide, it did outgross Rushmore by 7 million. Now it needs 8 million until Life Aquatic. It is kind of interesting how, like, sometimes, the domestic and worldwide lists will be pretty intact, but for something like Wes Anderson, it's like completely different. Like, domestically, it needs to outgross these films, but worldwide, oh, completely different ballpark. I just think that's funny. Number 9 is The Life of Chuck. I kind of assume, like, yeah, it's not going to get into the top 5. I don't think it's the kind of movie that you can advertise well and get, like, a huge box office hit out of it, just because, yeah, the marketing has to be vague because the experience is just too particular. Like, you can't ruin this experience. You kind of just have to go in. I think the trailers have done a good job of not telling you everything, but that can be a hard sell for some people, especially for some people who might not know it's been, because honestly, I don't think it's been marketed like everywhere, you know what I mean? I don't know how many people know it's a Stephen King adaptation. I don't know how many people, I think there are some people that know about Mike Flanagan from his Netflix series. I don't know how many people know that this is one of, his film, or that they recognize the name. So this is not too surprising for me. It made 2.1 million this weekend. This does add to a domestic total of 2.4. So yeah, it was in limited release last weekend. It's not bumping up a whole lot. I don't know what the budget of this thing is. You would think with the cast it might be a lot, but a lot of these people are friends with Mike Flanagan, so I would assume they maybe come in a little cheaper. Maybe it doesn't cost too much, but you never know. As far as Mike Flanagan's, domestic runs, it needs 25 million until it outgrosses Oculus. It's looking like this will not do that, but I'm just glad that, he got to make another film, a feature film, before he goes back to streaming. Good luck with the Carrie show on Amazon Prime. It's not Netflix this time. And finally, closing out the video, number 10, Sinners. This really is the end of an era, opened up in April, and was really making some box office gold, and now it's exiting the top 10. Made 1.47 million, adding to a domestic total of 275. Worldwide, that places it at 361. I don't think I need to go through the Coogler director stats. Obviously, it didn't outgross Wakanda Forever. For horror films, though, domestically, it outgrossed Jaws by 2 million. It is ending its time in the top 10, being at number 3 for the highest grossing horror films domestically. This places it 18 million away from the Sixth Sense run and 53 million away from It. Worldwide, it is so, such a short distance away from outgrossing the first Nun film, needing 1 million to do so, and it needs 67 million until it outgrosses The Exorcist. So it is about to exit the top 10, probably, outgrossing the Nun, so it'll be number 6. Not necessarily getting into the top 5. I think it's lost that momentum to get that 67 million, but close enough, goddamn. And then I wanted to look at the 2025 list just because, this movie was doing so well. For the year 2025 domestically, it has outgrossed Brave New World by 75 million, but it is behind Lilo and Stitch by 75 million as well, and the Minecraft movie by 148. But currently, as of right now, it is in the top 3 highest grossing 2025 domestic runs. Yeah, outgrossing a Marvel film like Brave New World, like an original horror film like this, that's crazy, right? Only took a Marvel director, I guess. And then for the worldwide 2025, it's not necessarily top 3, just because there's more competition. But it did outgross recently Final Destination Bloodlines, that by now is 96 million. So it is 16 million away from Thunderbolts, 52 million away from Brave New World, 91 million away from Tang-Tan 1900, 145 million away from Final Reckoning right now, 464 million away from Lilo and Stitch, 590 million away from a Minecraft movie, and 1.623 billion away from Neja 2, so it is currently number 8 for the highest grossing 2025 runs as of right now. So top 3 for domestic, worldwide top 10. Not too bad. Anyways, now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's top 5. Number 1, I do think How to Train Your Dragon will probably hold over well enough to get into the number 1 spot again. But number 2, and I can't really count it out, it could maybe usurp it, but 28 years later, I'm hearing that this one is a hot ticket item right now at the box office, Fandango pre-sales. This could be, another horror movie success here, which could be really exciting. But I want to leave some room for doubt just because How to Train Your Dragon is the family film to see right now. Not to diss my number 3 prediction, which is Elio. I think that one will, maybe do 20 to 30 million for its opening weekend. I think this will be another Disney Pixar film that's kind of reported as like, oh, is Pixar going down the drain? Oh man, here they go again, making an original film and it's not doing well. They should have just stuck with Inside Out 2. Number 4, I think, will be Lilo and Stitch, and then number 5, Materialists. But what are your predictions for next week's top 5? Leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.